welcome. You're tuned into TMH's Daily English News. Our headlines for today: the Tigray government says that the people of Tigray are being forced yet again into another round of war. Gsts pleads with the international community to prevent another round of war on the Tigray region. And The Economist says atrocities against the Tigrayans potentially could amount to genocide. As we move on to our main updates for today, a member of Tigris Central Command says the people of Tigray are being forced into war. In a briefing on Thursday, member of Tigris Central Command, Gsts said attacks by the Ethiopian National Defense Force on Dedebit in northwestern Tigray earlier this week are meant to provoke the people of Tigray into war. Gsts said the attacks by the Ethiopian forces constituted to a breach of the cessation of hostilities agreement as a unilateral declared by both sides in late March of this year. The cessation of hostilities agreement came months after the withdrawal of the Tigrayan forces from neighboring regions in early December that eventually led to an effective end to active combat between the two forces. The withdrawal of Tigray's forces was also accompanied by an expression of the government's commitment for the political dialogue towards peace talks. Regarding access to much-needed humanitarian assistance, Gsts said that humanitarian operations in Tigray have come to a near standstill as the number of trucks entering the region have shown a sharp decline in the past few weeks. While the Ethiopian government continues to provoke the government of Tigray, Gsts has come out with another statement for the IC community. Gsts pleads with the international community to prevent yet another round of war on Tigray by prevailing on the insurgent forces of the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. Timnit Bairu has more on this update.
Gsts today released a press statement raising alarm about the recent military provocations by the Ethiopian army. It is distressing to learn from reliable sources on the ground and an official press release from the Central Command of the Tigrayan Defense Forces dated 17th of August 2022 that on the 15th of August in the afternoon local time, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces stationed in the illegally occupied Western Tigray territories launched an attack on the defensive parameters of the Tigray Defense Forces. On several fronts, especially in the Dedebit area, the statement said. Gsts added it is also aware of a military buildup by the Eritrean regime bordering in some occupied areas of Tigray, a confrontation that the Ethiopian regime and its allies, the Eritrean forces, are preparing to launch yet another round of genocidal war against Tigray and its people. Gsts commended the TDF on the forbearance they have demonstrated in the face of such incitement. It is a testament to the commitment of the Tigrayan military and political leaders to the peace process. Gsts noted, adding that the Ethiopian government is yet to show similar commitment. On the 17th of August, the same date that the Central Command of TDF reported the attacks by the Ethiopian army, the Ethiopian government communicated to the diplomatic community in Addis Ababa a four-step dialogue. Gsts said according to this hypocritical proposal, lifting the brutal siege and re-establishing basic services will not only be considered by the government after the start of direct talks and ceasefire. This is disingenuous and a continuation of its unwillingness to engage in the peace process in good faith. It stated, adding, it is a part of the Ethiopian government's well-designed strategy to buy time and effectively continue its strategy of siege and slow death on the civilian population of Tigray. Gsts condemned the irresponsibility of the Ethiopian government, which is derailing the peace process at its infancy and plunging the already fragile country into another devastating war that can only culminate in total disintegration. Gsts believes that the biggest threat to the possibility of peace and reconciliation in Ethiopia is the insincerity of the regime led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the chronic hostility of President Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea. Gsts urgently requested the UN, US, EU, AU, and other actors in the international community to urgently condemn these provocative attacks on the defensive parameters of the TDF and demand that the Ethiopian regime halts all future provocations. It also called on the international institutions to impose meaningful consequences on the Ethiopian government for breaching the truce declared on March 2022 and ensure the resoluteness of the international community. It demanded that the Eritrean government to refrain from its incitement, spoiler acts, and asked the international community to enact measurable consequences of further aggressions. It also urged the international community to impose an arms embargo on Ethiopia and Eritrea to cut off supplies that can be used to further genocidal warfare. GSTS again called for the unconditional, complete, and verifiable withdrawal of Amhara and Eritrean forces from all Tigrayan territories to their deployment lines to the areas before November 3, 2020. GSTS also urged the international community that, in the event that the war is unavoidable, to ensure the unfettered flow of humanitarian aid to the over 7 million people of Tigrai. GSTS once again stressed the unimaginable human consequences of any further war in Tigrai and pleaded with the international community to prevent this war by prevailing on the intransigent forces of Ethiopian and Eritrean forces and using all available mechanisms. GSTS underlined that failing to realize the negotiating political end of the crises that have been initiated will lead to full-scale, devastating war with ultimate implications for the security and stability of the already volatile Horn of Africa region and beyond. GSTS is legally registered, non-partisan, and anonymous global knowledge network of over 5,000 Tigrayan scholars and professionals aimed at creating knowledge-based economy and society in Tigrai and beyond.
Thank you, Timnis Baru, for that detailed update on the GSTA statement. As we move on to our next news, on the Ethiopian government's hypocritically calling the WHO's chief statements quote-unquote unethical. Ethiopia's government is criticizing as unethical the statement by the World Health Organization's Director General that the crisis in the country's Tigray region currently is the worst disaster on earth. His assertion that the lack of attention from the global leaders may be due to the Tigrayan skin color. The spokeswoman for Ethiopia's prime minister on Thursday told journalists about the comments by WHO chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus were unbecoming of such a high-profile position, said Belene Siyom, as she suggested that Tedros himself, as an ethnic Tigrayan, should recuse himself from his post if he wants to speak that way. She spoke a day after the WHO chief in an emotional statement at a press briefing and asserted that the 6 million people in Tigray have been under siege for the last 21 months because of the conflict that erupted there in the late 2020 between Ethiopia and the Tigrayan forces. Let's take a listen to what Tedros Adhanom had to say.
But in terms of humanitarian crisis, I can tell you that the humanitarian crisis in Tigray is more than Ukraine, without any exaggeration. And I said it many months ago, maybe the reason is the color of the skin of the people in Tigray. I haven't heard in the last few months, several months now, even a head of state talking about the Tigray condition anywhere, in the developed world especially. Why? I think we know. Nowhere on earth 6 million people are sealed off. Nowhere. From basic services, from their own money, from telecom, from food, from medicine. This is the worst disaster on earth as we speak.
Ethiopia's conflict has serious regional implications, with the potential to destabilize the strategic and sometimes turbulent Horn of Africa region as whole. Very little humanitarian aid was allowed into the Tigray region after Tigrayan forces retook much of the region back in June 2021, and humanitarian workers and local health workers described people as starving to death and basic medical supplies completely running out. Aid has started flowing more substantially in the past few months amid international mediation efforts, but the deliveries are wildly described as inadequate to meet the needs of the people of millions essentially trapped there as well. Aid groups say major shortages of fuel to deliver supplies still remain. The resumption of basic services and banking remains a key demand of the Tigrayan forces, and on Thursday, the Prime Minister's spokeswoman said an operable environment needs to happen for the return of those services, including safety guarantees for the service workers within the region. She also noted a government proposal for peace talks in the coming weeks and stressed that they may be without any preconditions. Ethiopia's government has said it prefers to hold talks led by the African Union Special Envoy Olusegun Obasanjo, who has also lost all of his credibility in the eyes of the government of Tigray. In a sign of its rejection of other mediation efforts attempted by the neighboring Kenyan's President Uhuru Kenyatta with backing from the United States, Ethiopia's government offered its congratulations to the Kenyan president-elect William Ruto within minutes of Monday's declaration of his election win this year. A controversial statement and land distribution efforts by the Amhara authorities in western Tigray, allowing ethnic Amharas access to land, it's drawing protests from locals in the disputed region as well. With rare access to the town of Maikadra, reporter Henry Wilkins spoke to ethnic Tigrayans who claim that they were being forced from the region and ethnic Amharas who claim that they are neglected because of the new arrivals. The state-funded Ethiopian Human Rights Commission in Addis Ababa recently told VOA it could investigate claims of land being distributed unlawfully in western Tigray. According to Reuters' report published in June 2021, the Amhara regional authorities were encouraging ethnic Amhara to move into Maikadra in the western Tigray region, an area that has been administered by the Tigray region as well. As we move on to our final update today, The Economist says that these atrocities against the Tigrayans potentially amount to genocide. The horror stories are endless, yet Ethiopia's government denies them, says journalist Lusu Barhe, who in a guest essay for The Economist describes her struggle to write a Tigrayan while living in exile. More than a year has passed since Lucy first uncovered evidence of war crimes in the continuing conflict in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. Civilians have endured atrocities, including sexual violence, ethnic cleansing, systematic massacres, and even unspeakable torture and starvation as well. A mound of evidence gathered by the investigative journalist herself and rights groups suggest that the Ethiopian government's troops, allied soldiers from the Eritrean and local Amhara forces, have committed terrible atrocities against the ethnic Tigrayan population. The horror stories are endless, yet Ethiopia's government still denies them. But according to The Economist, these acts could potentially amount to a genocide as defined in the international law. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.